This lesson is creating page layouts with CSS. In this lesson, you'll learn how to begin creating a page layout in CSS. Specifically, you'll be creating a fixed width container that will always be centered on your page. To begin with, you'll need to define the DW05 Lessons folder as a site in Dreamweaver. After you do that, you will open the file layout.html. Now, a few things have already been done to this page. We've got this background image, and some font styles have been defined. But you're primarily concerned with layout here, and what we'd like to do is create a fixed width container that will then hold all of the content on your page. So to begin doing that, we need to add a div. A div is simply a nickname for the div tag or div element. And the div element allows us to divide our page into different areas that can hold content and be styled individually. Now, there are a couple of ways to add a div within Dreamweaver. You can go to the Insert menu, and under the Structure category, I can choose Div. I can also use the Insert panel and choose the first option, Div, from the Structure category. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. In the Insert Div dialog box, there are a couple of ways we can choose to insert our div. If I click the drop-down arrow, I can see that I can insert my div at the insertion point, at the start of tag, or before the end of tag. These other options will come in handy later on, but for now, at insertion point will work for our purposes. When creating a div, we can identify our div using a class or an ID. The difference between a class and an ID is that any given page may have multiple instances of a class, but may only have a single instance of an ID. Since our page will only have one container, we'll go ahead and use ID. And we'll name it container. At this point, I'm going to click OK, minimize my insert panel, and I'm going to use the CSS designer to create my style rules for our container. I'll choose Style from the Sources pane, and I'll click the Add Selector button. Dreamweaver recognized that I currently have my container selected and suggested the name pound container. The pound sign is used to identify rules for IDs. That selector name is fine for me, so I'll simply press Enter or Return. And next, in the Properties pane, making sure I'm in the Layout category, I'm going to set the width and height of our container div. If I double-click on Auto, I can specify the width in pixels. I'm going to specify a width of 840 pixels, and then a height of 800 pixels. Normally we wouldn't provide a height, as we'll want our container to expand to fit the amount of content in it, but for the purposes of creating our initial layout, adding a height will make it easier for us to add items to the container later. Finally, we'll add a background color to our container so that it will stand out from the background of the page. Click on the Background button, and from the background color swatch, choose white. From the design view, we can see that our container is now displayed with a white background at the width and height that we specified, and includes some placeholder text. Next, what we want to do is center our container on the page. Going back to the CSS designer and the layout properties, I'm going to go to the margin control. From the margin control, if I click on the left margin control pixel setting, I can choose auto. And I will also choose auto for the right margin. Choosing auto for the left and right margin, once I've specified a width, will allow the browser to calculate how much margin needs to be added to the left or right of our container in order to center our object on the page. Now, if we save our file and preview it in the browser, we can see our container centered on the page. And as I resize the browser, the container stays centered as the margins auto-calculate. However, if I go narrower than 840 pixels, our container will begin to get cut off. And that's due to the fixed width of 840 pixels that we added to our container. So there you have it. We've begun our layout by creating a div that will serve as a fixed width container that will always remain centered on our page. This lesson has been creating page layouts with CSS.